Hello, everybody. So, welcome to Computer Science 339 over the summer. Um, we haven't met in person, but my name is Samuel Eccles. I graduated last semester, actually, um, and I've been helping GDoc with this course for about 2 years now, I think. So the objective of this course is to get students familiar with how database stuff works because we don't really go over any of that in your prior classes except if you've taken probably 294, I believe, internet programming. You might have touched some SQL stuff there. Or 285, you did interact with a database. But here's how you do database stuff in the real world, so to speak, without all the cool frameworks like Entity Framework or an ORM. But here is database at its core. Um, so you got a few things going on. First of all, let's talk about software. There's a few softwares that you need to have installed for this course. One of them being Docker, uh, SSMS, and or Visual Studio Code. If you haven't installed any of these, I will put the links in the description, or I will ask GDoc to put the links in Canvas somewhere. But anyways, just to get you guys started, I'm assuming you also have Git, because if you don't, please go install Git. Um, you're going to want to go to this repository here. So this is a repository I created for this class. It's public. You can go look at it. But our first steps are going to be in this file. So we're going to clone this repository anywhere you'd like. It doesn't matter. I'm going to open my terminal and just, whoops, git clone. While it's cloning, oh, did I already install it here? Maybe, hang on. Desktop. Yup, whoopsies. Brief intermission. Alright, now that I did that, let's just do a fresh start here because I was working on it earlier. Alright, so that finished cloning, and I'm going to go into that directory. Just CD on Windows, and summer, and then I'm just going to open Visual Studio Code here. So now that we're in Visual Studio Code, I have 3 files. One of them is a license. Ignore that. It's like the least important file ever. And these 2 are the most important. So we're going to start with the Docker Compose file. And if you've never used Docker or have no idea what Docker is basically a containerization orchestration software framework to be able to allow developers to run things without having to download them on your computer, essentially. Essentially creates little micro VMs on your machine. And this is to prevent you having to go to Microsoft's website, install SQL Server, walk through the setup steps. It can all just be done here. I'm not going to go too much in depth about like what Docker Compose is or volumes or any of this. If you guys want to look into that, I highly suggest you do. But just let's start here. There's some important things in this file. Note the password here and the port here, as well as the, actually, nope, that's it. So to get started here, to actually use this Docker Compose file, I'm going to open my terminal in Visual Studio Code, and I'm in the directory of Docker Compose, and I'm just going to run Docker Compose up. And that will actually spin up our container. It might take a while if you haven't downloaded this before, but or if you haven't started it, this is a cold start, so to speak, but you'll get all these running, and then once that's run, it should say success. It'll create the SQL Server database and whatnot, and you're all good to go here. Sweet. So our next step is going to be, I'm going to open, actually, I'm going to close it real quick. I'm going to open SSMS. And if you have SSMS, you just type in SSMS here. And I have the preview and this one installed and the main one. I'm going to go ahead and jump into the preview because I like that one better personally. It doesn't matter which one you use, but per every Microsoft product, it might take a little bit to start. All right, so now that we're here, you should get a window that opens like this. And I'm going to pretend I don't. So this is SSMS, or SQL Server Management Studio. This is a software that's used to interact with your database, to run queries on if you want to get query analytics, to export, import. It can do a whole bunch of things. It's basically like an IDE, but specifically for Microsoft SQL Server database. So you can't really do much here without just bare bones. So we're going to actually be able to do stuff. So the first thing you want to do is initialize a connection. And we're going to do connect up in this top left corner and database engine. So you're going to get a window like this is open. Let's pretend none of this is here. So just clear all these variables, yada yada yada. It should default to Windows authentication. And so let's start here. For our server name, this is actually the IP address or host address that the server is located. So every database has to run on a server. And SQL Server is the server, and SQL Server Database is the database. But if we remember back to our Docker Compose file, I have this port right here. That's the port our SQL Server is running on at the moment. And because our SQL Server is locally, it's a locally hosted database. So our server name is actually going to be localhost, comma, no space, 1433. Localhost points us to the host address, or in some cases, this would be 127.0.0.1, but same thing. And then comma 1433, that's our port. So that's the first step. Second step is I'm going to go to the authentication scheme here, and I'm going to click on it and change it to SQL Server Authentication. Now this brings up the username and password boxes. For the username, you're going to put SA, just purely SA. That's the default that gets set. And for the password, we're going to jump back into our Docker Compose file, and this is the password that gets set. Now you can change this to whatever you want. I think it has to have like a certain number of characters, a special character, whatever. This is just the default that I put. So I'm just going to copy this right here and then jump back into SSMS and paste it. Now I'm going to say remember password because I don't want to have to type that in every time. And I'm going to leave this field blank as default right there. Encryption should be mandatory, and if this box isn't checked here, you want to say trust server certificate. And if you're using the preview, you can set the color just to identify the database better. I'm going to set it to green because why not? So if you have all these fields configured correctly, so localhost 1433, SQL Server Authentication, SA, I got the password, remember password, trust server certificate, encryption mandatory, you can click connect. And once that connects, you'll have this populated over here. I want you to completely ignore everything except databases. None of this is relevant to you at this point. And we probably won't go over any of it in this class, honestly. So if I expand the database window, I see I have system databases, database snapshots, and I have a database here that I was working with earlier. Let's pretend that doesn't exist right now. So, but we need to get you guys started with a database. So you're going to click on databases, make sure this is here. You can either click right here in the top left where it says new query, or control N, or you can right click and do, oh, never mind, I lied. That's not until later. So I'm going to do new query here. And you're going to get this window that pops up, and you can start typing in this, do anything. This is where we're going to actually run our SQL scripts. Hence the query window. This is the development part of the SQL IDE. So what we're going to do here to get started is we're going to pop back into Visual Studio Code, and in this init.sql file, open this, and you'll notice there's about a billion lines. I'm not, whatever. But you're going to copy all of this, so Control A, Control C, go back into SSMS, and just Control V, paste it all in there. Don't worry about what's in this file. You can read over it if you're that bored. Otherwise, don't worry about it. So this is going to create our database, and it's going to be called computerscience339.store. And this is just to get our starter database with some data seeded into it and some tables, just to get us like a place to work. So I'm going to go ahead and do execute. So there's this execute button that's green right here. If you don't like clicking, you can also do Alt-X I've never done that before, but I like clicking. So I'm going to run execute. And it's going to take a little bit of time because there's a lot of data being inserted into here. And you can actually see the query running down there in your bottom right corner. I'll say executing query right here. And so we're just going to wait until that executes. And so now that that has executed, you should see a bunch of output right here that says one row affected, and all the way down to the bottom, one row affected. And I'm going to close this window here, and I'm going to kind of shrink it here. So that means our operation finished. So let's look back over to our databases window right here. I still only have that one database I was working with earlier. And I need to, since I just created this database, I'm going to go ahead and refresh. So you can hit F5 or just click refresh right here, and the database should appear, computerscience339.store. So now that the database is there, I can open this database and I can look at all my tables here. And now that I can see all my tables, I have LT address, LT customer, or sales LT address. So let's just kind of, I'm gonna close this, I don't want to save it. Let's just kind of like begin looking around here. So a table, if you're unfamiliar with the concept, is basically a structure of data, or a structure for you to put data in. Every table is made up of columns. The columns are what defines like the name of the data or the structure of the data, essentially. So if you've ever used a spreadsheet and you have a table, it's literally a table. So in our address table, I see I have all these folders right now, but the one we're going to focus on is columns. So I see I have these column names: address ID, address line 1, address line 2. This is the structure of our address table. So I'm going to go ahead and right click on this table, and I get a bunch of options right here. And I just want to look at the data. I'm going to select the top 1000 rows. So again, I right clicked on the table and I click select top 1000 rows. And I see all this data here. All that data. I got 450 rows. So you can go in and see like what addresses are here. So this one is 8713 Yosemite, whatever that is, in Bothell, Washington, wherever the heck that is. So this is what a SQL database table will look like when you run it in the query window. So, and you'll notice it also generates this script here. This is what is called a query. A query is essentially, well, it is a query. So like when you ask a question, that's an inquiry. I'm asking this database for data. So let's just say I didn't have this and I wanted to write this query from scratch. SQL convention is usually like all caps, so I'm going to do it all caps. I'm going to select. Now, when you write a select statement, you notice again we have these columns. You can either select columns that you want to project in this query. So like if I do address ID, oh, whoops, address ID, this will only select the address ID column. And then after I've selected the address column, I have to say, well, where am I getting this data? I'm going to say from sales LT dot address. So again, breaking this down, I'm selecting address ID from sales LT dot address, from the sales LT dot address table. These are keywords in SQL. This is technically a keyword, and when this happens, we kind of want to do a little of that, just to, oh, whoops. We want to wrap this in some braces or brackets here, just to say, hey, this is the name of something. And we also kind of want to do that with our parameter name. So let's run this query and see what happens. I only get address ID in my table, and that may not be very useful to some people. If I'm like a business owner and I want to see all the data in my table, why do I only see address ID? Well, rather than having to list all of these columns out, one thing that you can do is you can just star. And that's basically saying select all the fields. So if I execute this, oh, hang on. Don't know why that errored. If it errors, just run it again. So this will select all the columns in general. Cool. So now we've selected data, you've set up your database, you can go in and play with this however much you want. I advise you don't do anything too destructive because we will be using this database and um, we'll be working with it in the future. Uh, these are all your tables. I've shown you how to set up the Docker Compose file and also this repository. Please do not forget to clone this repository. It will be linked in the description, as well as I will ask GDoc to publish it in Canvas. And that's really all I have for introductions. We'll have a more in-depth lecture next time. We'll jump more into some query operations, onto analyzing queries, more useful things for your project. But yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to either myself or GDoc. I have Discord. I'm Samuel Eccles on Discord. Uh, so yeah, um, talk to you guys later.